Welcome everybody to another episode of the Dragonus Podcastus. I am your host, Ed Ponick, and with me is tracker and professional
Mhm.
stalker or hunter, Byron, of course, as always.
They never see me coming.
No, they never do, and for me, it's usually because I'm either tracking down a wild animal or there are a couple hobbits that are going to Isengard. Anyway, if you guys enjoy our little show here and want to support us, you can do so at patreon.com/Dragonus Podcastus, where we are going to be hopefully we actually get some support here, but along the way we're also working on the bingo card. We're going to be maybe doing, I don't know, questionnaires, all that kind of crazy stuff. But anyway, so Byron, do you like shooting stuff with bows and arrows?
If I could do it in real life, I absolutely would.
Okay. Do you like talking to animals?
Yes.
Do you like touching and feeling the ground?
Yeah, touch grass, right?
Yeah. Well, I got good news and bad news. The good news is that I found a class for you. The bad news is it's Ranger. But
Oh.
before we tackle that little issue right there, I think we should get a few misconceptions and kind of address why like a large portion of the community believes that Ranger is or was considered to be the worst class in D&D. Do you want
Mm.
to start us off and answer that question a little bit?
Why do people think it's the worst class?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so I think this is actually kind of one of those self-fulfilling prophecies almost, where people online and in forums and Facebook groups and Reddit and social media have said, "Ah, Ranger sucks." Oh, okay, great. So people who see that kind of internalize it, and when they play a Ranger, maybe they don't have a great time, or maybe the campaign is not suited for that character type, and they think, "Oh, Ranger sucks. I hate Rangers." And they go online and complain, "Oh, Ranger sucks. I hate playing Rangers. They're the worst class." And then someone else will see it, and again, they play in a campaign that's not well suited to host a Ranger, or if they're part of a bad group or a bad session, "Oh, I hate Rangers," and they're going online, "The Ranger sucks. It's the worst class." I don't believe the Ranger is the worst class, and the numbers back me up because Wizards of the Coast have done surveys over the years, and as recently as I think 2021, they did a survey that said that Ranger was among the more popular classes from people surveyed. So it's easy to go on social media and see, "Oh, Ranger sucks." People are typing on their keyboards and all. But I think that represents a small minority of people who actually play D&D. Most people who play, I believe most people who play don't engage in Facebook groups or social media related to D&D. They just play with their friends and they have a great time. So I think that the misconception of the Ranger being the worst class is just kind of perpetuated itself through the social media and the way that people perceive, and it's kind of like a bias that they take with them when they play a Ranger. The thing is that when you play a Ranger, its main focus is exploration, which is one of the three core pillars of D&D: combat, roleplay or social encounters, and exploration. However, I feel like this pillar is often forgotten or ignored, overlooked by DMs when they're running campaigns and maybe players when they're playing. So the Ranger is well suited to a pillar of D&D that's not very well played or very well explored, if you will. So I can see why people would be frustrated playing a Ranger when, let's say, you're playing a Ranger and you're doing a city campaign and there's really no exploration. There's no overland travel of any great distance. Well, yeah, that would be really frustrating. You want to play a Ranger when you know that there's going to be wilderness. Hopefully your favorite terrain will come up as one of the Ranger class features. You know, you can tailor the Ranger to fit into a campaign that you're in.
Okay. Well, here's an interesting. Well, this is kind of because I'm tragically or old school, but as I understand it, basically Rangers are kind of that person. They're like, if you need to like find somebody, they're like a they're like a human bloodhound. They can track
Mm.
anybody for miles. Also, one other misconception that unfortunately is kind of thrown in the corner here is that Rangers tend to be like they're not like melee based classes. They're not a
Mm,
melee based class. They tend to use ranged weapons, which
mm,
is not indicative of the class because as we'll go through our examples of famous rangers, um, they're very effective with melee
mhm,
weapons. It's just that they choose to use ranged weapons because that's better suited to their skill set. That and most, if not all, rangers are basically they're hunters, so they want
mhm,
to basically hunt their prey and they want to take them out. It's kind of like how a hunter in real life would hunt a wild animal and they want to take it out from range rather than go up close because if you go up close to it, there's a chance it'll either run away or it will fight back.
mhm.
And the other neat little thing about it that's more kind of it's a weird niche thing, but I found that this is also the class that has the closest relationship with druids because they have the ability to not only communicate with animals, but also to kind of tame them, which is where a lot of some of the subclasses abilities come from, where they have like a familiar or a pet that follows them around that they can command to do. It's kind of the idea of basically it's like living out like out on the frontier and you have like have an animal that kind of protects your household, and when you go hunting, well, you have something that can track a wounded animal. I think uh Wizards did a good job like in terms of applying like real life stuff
Mhm.
and pertaining it to a particular class. And
Yeah.
it's interesting also that the ranger does have spellcasting abilities, but in older editions, they actually they took from the cleric uh, spell list as
Oh,
opposed,
okay.
and now they have their own dedicated spell list, which you would think they would be taking from either, say, I don't know, bits of the cleric and bits of the druid, but they have their own dedicated class, which has their own unique spells, and some spells are borrowed over, and the spell classing of a ranger is more. It's an opportunity thing. If the ranger sees an opportunity to use some kind of magic to say boost their attack, increase their accuracy, or heal something, then that's what they'll do. If they don't have access to other means of healing and all that, this is also the class that specializes in, well, herbalism and like it's the wild class. Basically, it's the guy who is like the survivalist.
Mhm.
Uh,
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So going into famous rangers, so so our list. So Katniss from the Hunger Games. Now
Yep.
I have not seen the Hunger Games, so I now grant
So,
now granted I
mhm,
know of the Hunger Games and I've
mhm.
seen bits and pieces, and I know Katniss is. I agree with that. Katniss is definitely a ranger in the sense of the survival and using a bow.
Yeah. So in the books too, not, obviously movies have to cut things out. They don't have time to show everything, but in the books, she's well known in her local area where she's from as being a hunter, forager, and she basically fed her family. She traded hunted game and found food and things like that with other people for other types of things that she couldn't find. But she's absolutely a ranger in not only does she use a bow, but she's a skilled hunter. She's a great forager. She's a real survivalist, like you said.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the two big ones here, Aragorn and Legolas. Now,
Yeah.
Aragorn kind of transitions from a ranger to more kind of like a fighter because, and he's probably the example of the ranger fighter dual class example because in the first movie he barely uses his bow because mainly uses his sword, but he has the ranger expertise about like
Hmm.
surviving in the wild,
Yeah.
track. tracking's the big one, and then
Yep.
by the second and third movie, he kind of transitions into more of a fighter, and he becomes like he basically becomes a commander, and that he kind of and he's even encouraged to put aside the ranger aspect of himself and become, more than he is is right at that moment, which is good. Legolas is I would say he's the stereotypical ranger, but I would also argue that he could also be he has elements of fighter and rogue in there.
Mm.
Um, it's it it could be argued that, but that's all up to interpretation. I think Legolas gets away with a lot more than he should.
Mhm.
Like, if I had to going on a bit of a tangent here. So, Battle of Helm's Deep, right? I mean, granted, there's a couple things that are okay. The only thing I'm not a fan of is, um, you know, Legolas not being able to shoot that one guy. You had one job, Legolas, and now the wall's blown up because of you. Now that could also be because he's been doing pretty well, and then he either runs out of arrows or he's, because of battle fatigue, he could be just, slipping on the dice rolls. The thing is interesting is that he knows exactly where the armor's weakest for the Uruks, below at the neck and below the arm. Um, but the Uruks that they fought at Amon Hen weren't as heavily armored like the Two Towers Uruks. Um, and another thing is, but this kind of Legolas also defies the stereotype because when he runs out of arrows, he actually pulls out his two fighting knives and basically hacks a bunch of orcs to pieces, and then he goes back to, you know, scrounging up arrows and then, firing off. Um, it's also interesting that he like the whole like shield surfing thing. Like, he either has to be the luckiest bastard alive, or
Uh-huh.
he probably was rolling really good, or he has a bunch of modifiers, because you have to for balance, roll to shoot, and then jump off at the right time, allowing for momentum to carry the shield to that one guy, and then he pulls out his sword and kills another orc. And then in the third movie, he takes out 3 arrows and kills a Mumakil. Now, that could be argued to be, well, it's triple arrows, so it does triple the damage. I'm okay with that. Um, yeah, I think that's all right. Hawkeye. Yep, I agree with that. I could also add Green Arrow to this because of the trick arrows, and also because they have, like, Hawkeye is like deadly accurate with that thing, and
Mhm.
that's not like a D-string bow or a recurve bow. That's like a compound bow kind of thing going there. Um, Also, it's funny because he also uses his bow. He collapses it into a staff as the films go on, and eventually he just dons a sword, which kind of the Aragorn discussion here. Merida is an interesting one. Um, just I actually recently rewatched Brave, and I'm genuinely surprised like how well it does the archery, because wow.
Mm.
Um,
And not only is she obviously a skilled archer, right? Because they show that, but she also does have some wilderness experience, uh, going through the woods, living in, kind of a wild area. They live very rurally. She has those, experiences climbing, hunting, going through the woods and all that stuff too, like a ranger would have.
yeah, and she can also shoot from horseback, so that's a bonus right there. Also, I should point out that she schooled almost all three of the contenders while
Mm-hmm.
wearing a restrictive dress, and she did all that by herself.
Mm-hmm.
It was all skill. There was no luck. There was no plot armor. There was nothing like that. It's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jon Snow's a bit of a weird one because I haven't seen Game of Thrones, but I know of the meme, so and yeah, you know nothing, Jon Snow. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Um,
So, yeah, I think Jon Snow is one of the examples on the list that does that of a ranger who doesn't actually use a ranged weapon. Um, they show him training with lots of different kinds of weapons, but he is the example that has a beast companion with him, more so than the rest, I think. He actually really bonds with the direwolf that he finds it. His whole family finds a pack of direwolf babies, right? And their mother's gone, this whole thing. And they find one direwolf for each of the different children, and Jon Snow, unfortunately, is being a bastard in the story. His direwolf was actually all white. It was very interesting, but he absolutely learns to communicate with his animal companion, and it's a steadfast companion for him throughout the entire season or throughout the entire show.
yeah. Just kind of transitioning back to Aragorn for a second. Aragorn does have the communicating with animals. Like he more or less tames them and kind of like I think the animals, particularly horses, they actually like they kind of they respond to his commands, but they're also kind of protective of him, which is interesting. And it I don't know if you actually know this, but the stories of Viggo Mortensen and all the crazy
Mhm.
stuff he went through while filming Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
Like for example, just going off the list here, he deflected an actual dagger that was not meant to be thrown at him. That was a complete accident. The whole
yeah,
kicking the helmet and breaking his toe, that
right.
that was pretty. Now that's more him putting. It's more method acting, but it's still pretty impressive that he actually managed to pull that off. And then there's the
Yeah,
whole, well, him getting knocked off a horse, well, and then getting back up and falling over a cliff. That's more Aragorn's thing. But then when Vigo was floating down the river, he actually like got caught up and he almost drowned. And it was an interesting when I found out about that. I'm very surprised that he managed to get through that because almost everybody on during the filming suffered some kind of injury. Like the big one was Orlando Bloom. He cracked a rib, or he I think he bruised a rib or something. The other big one was Sean Astin. He had his foot impaled by a shard of glass.
yeah.
Um, what was it?
But
Yeah. Anyway, so okay, so going into abilities, we've kind of covered almost everything here, but I think I think we should answer a couple questions here. So, what does a favored enemy exactly do exactly? Does that and how does that correlate with what a ranger is supposed to, be as part of the party?
So, yeah, favorite enemy is kind of the idea that Ranger has spent time studying their favorite enemy, knowing them, moving, following them and things like that. So you pick one of the types, right? So you got aberration, beast, celestial, construct, dragons, elemental, fey, fiend, giant, monstrosity, oozes, plants, or undead. Or if you don't want to pick one of those type, you can choose two races of humanoids. So, for example, elves and dwarves are humanoid races, but you don't get all humanoids. So, when you pick the favorite enemy, whatever it is, maybe you're adept at hunting giants. Maybe giants destroyed your hometown when you were little and you swore vengeance across the whole
Fern.
species. So, you learn the language of your enemy, which is kind of nice. You can also basically remember information about them. You have advantage to tracking them, things like that. It's like you've been studying them so that you can hunt them and kill them better.
Okay, and then so what does the last two abilities you get at the end of the ranger ability list? What do you feral sense and okay, full slayer is pretty obvious, but what does feral sense do?
Yeah, so feral sense. This is one of their capstone abilities, right? Having being kind of close to the end of their level up progression, right at 18. basically you get the ability to better fight creatures that you can't see. So if you're trying to hit somebody who's invisible or maybe they're hiding, you don't have disadvantage against those kinds of creatures to hit them. You can also be aware of the location of any invisible creatures as long as they're not actually hidden and you're not blind or deaf. So normally an invisible creature you can't see and it's harder to hit them that whole bit, but with these extra senses that the rangers have, they're better able to attack people that they can't see.
Okay. So going into subclasses, so okay, Hunter and Beastmaster are kind of self-explanatory, but what are the differences between the rest of the subclasses: Fey Wanderer, Swarm Keeper, Gloomstalker,
hmm
Horizon Stalker, and Monster Slayer? Oh, I think Monster Slayer is pretty obvious.
Yeah, yeah. So Monster Slayer, it's kind of in the name, right? Just kind of like Hunter is. Um, Beastmaster is more about talking to beasts. I guess we didn't really mention him during the um, famous Rangers in media, but Beastmaster, like the guy, right, from the '80s cartoon, Beastmaster.
Oh yeah.
Um, right. I mean, that's a decent example of a ranger because this is one of their abilities. Most rangers can talk to animals, but a beastmaster, this is really their prime focus. Tuning into nature and talking to animals and getting them to help you. And a lot of times, a beastmaster will have an animal companion that follows them around, right? Fey Wanderer has a lot to do with the Feywild and kind of things like that. So maybe you're from the Feywild or you spent some time there and you have some kind of fun different abilities in regards to that. Gloomstalker is all about shadow and mist and kind of gloom if you will, and being able to have kind of like not fake weapons but weapons made of shadow, which are really effective, and that's super fun. Um, Horizon Walker is one that I'm not really super familiar with, but I would have to say that they have more magic. It looks like they get spells at different levels, and they are kind of more like you might say a multiverse kind of ranger where they're going through planes and they're dealing with different kinds of creatures that are coming from the different planes as well, like devils and demons and things like that. And then Swarmkeeper is one of my favorites. This is one where you kind of have kind of what it says in the name, where you have a swarm of whatever that you kind of control that works with you. So a ranger that I'm building to play in an upcoming campaign is a Swarmkeeper ranger whose name is Honey, whose swarm is a swarm of bees.
Yep,
And
of course. Swarm of Bees. Yep, I knew that was coming. I knew that was
yes,
coming.
and so with the Swarmkeeper, a lot of times when you attack, the attacks do extra poison damage on top of the regular damage. So in my head, I'm imagining a swarm of bees is attacking.
Okay, so bees. That sounds like a lot of fun, actually. Now that I think about it,
hmm
you
hmm
could do that with almost any kind of swarm based thing. You could do it with like ants or I don't know,
Yeah,
or
spores,
yeah, or or
spore,
or
pollen.
my favorite particular joke: a flock of turtles.
Whatever you want to flavor it as. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, and then okay, there's that. So okay, just kind of wrapping up here. So um, what are your final thoughts about before we wrap up about like do you think the hatred towards Ranger is unjustified? Do you think it has some weaknesses? Do you think it like what are your thoughts?
No, there are weaknesses to it. But I just like anything else, I think it's about the campaign you're playing in, the group you're playing with, and the story that you want to tell. I think a ranger is a wonderful option. I played a ranger several years ago in a campaign of Storm King Slender, which is an older hardcover module for 5th edition, but it has a lot of overland travel, and that was something that my ranger was obviously very proficient in, and it worked really well. I had a ton of fun. And I think that a ranger is a great class for people like if you want to have that survival aspect, you want to have those fighting skills, things like that. No, don't discount the ranger.
Yeah, don't there's we're an equal opportunity podcast. We we allow for Everybody can play whatever class they want.
Yeah,
We don't judge.
absolutely.
Unless you play the pest controller or the peasant, then maybe we may have a couple issues. I cannot believe those are actual classes from classic D&D. Anyway, next week is, as our usual routine, we're going to be doing a lore video. Not going to say what it is, but you trust me, you guys will have a lot of fun. We'll see you guys next time.